Welcome back. What I have in front of me is the Taranis X9d, arguably one of the most popular radios in the world. And I bought this one as a extra radio, and it has a problem with it. And the problem has to do with arguably one of the dumbest ideas in the world. It has to do with this stupid USB port. I'm assuming, since this is used, that it had been dropped on the cord, had been dropped on its back while the cord is connected a bunch of times. And now this USB port doesn't work unless you hold the cord in just the right position, and you got to hold it there the whole time. So flying a sim, no way, not going to happen because you can't hold the cord in the plug long enough. So I have come up with a way to permanently fix this issue and to improve the Taranis for USB connections for either the accessing the SD card or playing sims. And I'll show you what that is.
Just some quick information. I recorded this a very long time ago before my my audio was any good. Please bear with it. The content is too good to go and record it again, and yeah, it took too much to get the original content. So please bear with it. If you're interested in this kit, please check out the link in the video description. All right, on to the repair.
So ideally, you would want your USB cord to come out of someplace that's not going to get damaged every time you put your radio down. Where would that be? Out the top. No questions about it. Out of the top is probably the best place to have a USB port. And this mini USB port is kind of outdated. The cords are kind of hard to find. They're expensive-ish. And they don't seem to last, even on other things I have that use this size USB port. The cords don't last. So think about changing it up to a micro USB port. Super common. These things seem to last forever, and if they don't, it's usually the cord that fails and not the port. And they're a lot easier to find. So what we're going to do is we're going to install a mini USB port in the top of our Taranis. So here's how we're going to do this repair. I have this little kit. It contains two pieces. One is the actual USB port on a little mount, and this is the micro USB style, and a template. What the template does is it helps you get an idea where to cut the hole in the top of your radio. This is probably going to be the hardest part. This kit's going to require a little bit of cutting and a little bit of soldering and a little bit of work on your radio. This isn't super easy, but it's not hard either. If you're careful and you follow these directions, you should have no problems. So let's go ahead and get the radio apart. So first things first, we got to disassemble the radio. But before you do that, take out your battery pack, and I'll tell you why in a minute. Take out your battery, set it aside. Remove your module bay, and if you have a module in there, like a Crossfire or R9 or one of these multi-protocol things, make sure you take that out. Get yourself a number 1 Phillips bit, Phillips screwdriver, and remove the 6 screws that are on the radio. Okay, now that we have our 6 screws loose, we're going to need to loosen up our switches here. So usually you can just grab a hold of the rings and turn them. Sometimes you need to use a small screwdriver and you can turn it, or there is a special tool to loosen those up, but I don't have one of those and I've never needed one. So we'll just give those a little turn, and we should be able to separate the two halves. Just pull up nice and straight. I'm very careful not to snag anything. And just fold it open like this. Alright. The next step is we got to remove these 2 ribbon cables. Now, if you didn't remove your battery and you disconnect these ribbon cables, there's a very, very high chance that you will fry the CPU in this. And you'll have to either re-chip this or replace the board. You don't want to do either one of those. So double check that that battery is removed. Yep, battery's out. Now to undo these, put your fingernails on each side of this dark gray clip and push this way. It won't come all the way out. It'll just move about, I don't know, 2-3 centimeters, and then the ribbon cable should pop out. And that's the same for both sides. There you go. You take your front half, and we'll set that aside. We're not going to need that for a little while. So now what are we looking at? We're looking at the backboard of the Taranis. We're going to want to disconnect all our switches and plugs. So disconnect these two switches, and that one, and that one. Okay, now we're going to see where it is that we're going to install our new USB port, and it's going to be right here. I chose this side for the design because it worked the best for me. You might be able to install it over here, but no guarantees that's going to work. So grab yourself an 8mm hex driver, and we're going to take this nut out. And we'll set that aside. Take your template piece, very carefully slide it over the top of the radio. And put it over top of the stud for your bar in the back. And it should fit into place just like this. And just to make sure it doesn't move around, let's go ahead and reinstall this nut. Now with that template in place, it's going to give us a rough idea of where we're going to need to cut a hole. Now, there's a couple different ways you can go about doing this. You can use, I've got a tiny flathead screwdriver. It's got, you know, the end's kind of busted on it. Works really good for scribing into the paint. Just work your way around the switch, around this, around the USB port hole, and just make a tiny mark all the way around it. That way you know kind of roughly where the USB port's going to go. And once you've made a good scribe, go ahead and remove the template. Okay, we can set this aside. Next, we need to make a hole in the case. This is the scary part. This is the hardest part of this entire job. And the more time you take on it, the better it's going to be. If you rush through it, it's going to look terrible. If you take your time and are very, very careful, taking little bits out at a time, you're going to end up with a decent looking product. I suggest if you have a good soldering iron, which if you don't have a good soldering iron, you need to stop now because you're going to need a decent soldering iron. Basically anything that is temperature controlled. If it has a display on it with a temperature on it, you're probably good to go. My personal method for poking this hole in here, at least to get me started, is to melt it. So I'm going to turn on my soldering iron and I'm going to set it up for about 600 degrees Fahrenheit. Give it a second to warm up. Make sure you clean your tip off really well. Make sure there's no residual solder on it. Alright, nice clean tip. And what you're going to want to do is find your mark and just kind of burn all the way through. And that's it. Make sure you retin your tip. And put your soldering iron away. Always leave a glob of solder on your tip before you put it away. Make it last longer, keep it from oxidizing. All right. Now that we've got a hole started and we've still got our scribe line in the top of our radio, get yourself a hobby knife with a new blade on it, a nice sharp blade, and just start working your way around the hole, taking off a little bit of material at a time. And make sure you cut straight with the case. Don't cut at an angle because you're going to leave this really weird rough edge all the way around it. Just want to cut nice and straight, just a tiny bit at a time. You can kind of rough out the opening a little bit if you have a deburring tool. It really helps to take a lot of material out, but it'll leave a really nasty curved edge on the outside of the case, which looks kind of bad. But if you do that just enough, and you come back and clean it up with an X-Acto knife, it'll turn out all right. All right. Once you've got your hole cut, what you can do is take your new USB port and you can install it. So just kind of hold it up there by hand, you know, pushing down this way. You can kind of see how the port lines up. You can see how far off you are. And I designed the template to be a little on the small side in case there's any variance in your case or the parts. That way you're not initially taking out too much material. So I can tell that my port is wide enough this way. And it's good down here. I just need to take out a little bit more material on this side. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Alright, that looks pretty good right there. So, now with the added thickness of the mount for the USB port, the nylon in this nylock washer, or this nylock nut, isn't going to engage on the threads. So, you can either find a shorter nut if you want, or you can put it back in backwards. It's a little difficult to do, but it'll work. It's not a really crucial structure, so just go ahead and thread it back in backwards. There we go. And our USB port is pretty much centered in the hole. I'll grab a USB cord just to make sure we can actually engage the pins. It feels pretty good. All right. So now that our port's installed, we get to do the fun part, and that's soldering everything. So next, we're going to need to remove your backboard. It's going to be these 6 screws. Go ahead and pull this out now. Okay. Just want to be very careful you don't scratch the solder mask on any of this. You don't want to damage any traces. What I'm going to do is carefully pull straight up on your backboard. It might be a little stuck. And what's usually getting stuck on is that old USB port. That's it's probably a good reason why they get damaged so often. So now we're looking at the back. This is our USB port. And you're going to notice that there are a bunch of solder points on there. There's some solder points here on the bottom side. There's some solder points here on the top. And on the other side of the board, there's a couple solder points here. We're going to be utilizing a lot of those. And I'll show you where to solder to. Okay. We're going to go ahead and make our connections. So turn on your soldering iron, and I suggest kind of a medium chisel tip and about 750 degrees. Get ourselves a little bit of solder. And I'll be sure that you tin the ends of all your wires just a little bit. Okay, so first we're going to do is we're going to do the connections on the USB port side of the board, like right there. I like to use a set of tweezers that are kind of self-closing. Tends to work out a little bit better for me. Alright, first connection is going to be the power wire. the red wire coming off of our new USB port is going to go to right here. Okay, so our soldering iron is heated up. Make sure you clean your tip off really good. Put just a tiny bit of solder on the end of your iron to create that nice thermal bridge. And very carefully hold your wire against that blob of solder and just really quickly touch it and get off. And hold the wire there for a second to solidify, and there you go. It's one down. Next one is going to be the ID wire. So it's going to be this blue one here. Okay, so again, clean your iron up nice and good. Tiny little bit of solder on the end. I mean, barely even a pinhead size. Get your wire in place. Try not to touch any of the other plastic stuff because the solder iron will melt it or in a right quick hurry. And there we go. Just be very careful you don't burn any of your traces here. Okay. 3 left. Next one's going to be ground, which is the black wire coming off your new USB port. That's going to go on the back side here. And you want to think about the lay of the wires once you flip the board over, how everything's going to come out. You kind of want your wires to come out between like the headphone jack here and your module bay pins. So I'm going to try running everything kind of in that general direction. And this wire is going to go right there. Alright. You know the drill. Clean. Get your wire in place. A little dab of solder. Try not to touch anything plastic. Get in, melt, get out. That's it. Okay, move on to the other side of the board. Go ahead and flip it over. And when you're doing this, think of the lay of the wires. You kind of want them all to come out the same direction. I like to put them between this port here and your module bay pins. And you got to remember there's a couple screws that got to go in, so just think about the way you're going to run it. Make sure you put it in. There's a little black tab down here that goes in first, and then you kind of wiggle everything into place. And if something that gets a little hanging up is the old USB port. This guy here on the bottom kind of has to get pushed through the case. Alright, so now those are all in place. Grab your wires and just give them a little push. Make sure they're not pinched by anything. Seem to have plenty of slack. Alright, now at this point I would go ahead and install your screws back into your backboard. Now if at any time while you're screwing this in you feel like you're kind of sucking the board down to the case, like if something's keeping it from laying down flat, I would stop and double check your wires, make sure you're not pinching anything, make sure your ports are pushed through on the other side. Especially if you painted the case, the extra paint tends to add a bit of bulk to the case, making the ports hard to get in and out. So, tip, if you're going to paint your case, make sure you kind of clean the paint off the inside of the holes first before you put it together. Otherwise you'll be fighting these delicate electronics. Alright, so the two wires we have left are the actual communication wires for the USB port. Should be the green and the yellow. And there's two different ways you can do this. I'm sure there's more than two different ways you can do this, but there's two ways here that I'm going to show you how to do this. We need to solder to these super tiny little solder points here and here. But you've got to be extremely careful if your iron's too hot and you're on the pads too long. These two little resistors here, they'll lift and they'll disappear, and those things are microscopic. They're extremely hard to solder back in place. So that's one way. You can solder there. Or there's exposed pads on the back here. There's continuity all the way through the board. You can solder the back side. I recommend you probably try soldering to the back side. So, first thing we're going to have to do is we're going to have to put a little bit of solder on those pads. That way we have something to actually attach to. It makes it a little bit easier. So, again, go ahead and clean your iron. And again, I'm at 750. That's just what works good for me and my iron. Just get in there, put a little bit of solder on the pad, and get out. And we'll do the one next to it. A little bit of solder on there. And there we go. We got a little bit on there, not a lot. Let it cool off here for a second. I'll hit it again. So be very careful we don't bridge the two pads, because it's kind of a pain in the butt removing that bridge solder. There we go. Two nice shiny solder pads. Alright. So, got these two wires left. I'm going to do the yellow one first, since that's on the left. It just kind of works out better for me. However you like to work, it's entirely up to you. And you want to make sure your exposed wire length's not too long. You don't want to have to worry about it bridging. So, just kind of make sure your length's right. And right there looks good. So, clean iron. A little bit of solder on the tip. Get in, melt, get out. There we go. And last but not least, your green wire. Planning out your route is most of the soldering here. Clean iron, a little bit of solder, get in, get out, and we are good. Turn our soldering iron off. Make sure you give her a good old blob of solder on there, and try not to put solder on your iron over the board. It'd be a shame. The blob of solder got somewhere on there and you didn't notice it. You short it out. Alright. So there you go. 1, 2, and then our 3 on the back. And we are good to go. You want to double check your solder joint. Make sure you don't have anything that's bridged. Connect to your charging light, if you've got that. And your charging port. right there. And go ahead and grab your other case half. Here comes a pretty frustrating part, is trying to put these ribbon cables back in. So what you want to do is make sure your little keeper here is pushed all the way out. Try to get the two case halves as close as possible, give you a little bit of slack to work with. Be very careful you don't pinch, crease, or bend these ribbon cables too far. And you just slide the blue end under and keep wiggling around until it drops in. See how far in it is? And while you're giving it just a gentle bit of pressure on the backside, pull that clip closed. That's it. Give it a tiny tug. Good to go. And same thing on the far side. And there you go. You want to make sure it looks like there's about the same amount of blue showing from left to right and on both sides. That should tell you that they're in. And if you didn't remove them from the front half, you can kind of get an idea how far they should be in, because those should be, if we didn't touch them, they should be in the proper distance. And I'm going to position our switches back in the front half. At least this is the way that works the best for me. Your results might vary. And carefully put your switches back in. Take your back half, carefully fold it over. Onto the front half. And the two halves should mate up. And while you're squeezing it a little bit, then drop a screw in. Alright, all the screws are back in, and forget to tighten down your switch locking nuts. Make sure all your switches move the way they're supposed to. Your sticks still move. Everything feels alright. We'll go ahead and put our battery back in. Put our module back in. And we should be ready to test this. So let's hop over to the computer and plug it in, see what happens. Go ahead and turn the Taranis on.
Welcome to OpenTX.
Wait for it to open up. Grab my micro USB cable. Plug it in the top. See, it comes up. Whether I can use a USB joystick or as storage, I'll select storage. Computer recognizes it. And these are always a little slow to recognize. There it is. See our internal drive and our USB, our SD card on our Taranis. There you go. All fixed. Super reliable connection. Updated USB port. Problem solved. No need to buy a new backboard. And it's a cheap kit. It's a cheap fix. And it works. And it's going to last a lot longer than the old USB port.
Thanks for watching. If you're interested in this kit, please check out my Etsy shop. It's in the link in the description below. I want to provide this for the community. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of other ways you could do this, but this is the solution I came up with that works very well for me. I've done this to a few different radios, and it it's a marketed improvement. All right, guys. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, click that bell icon for notifications, and if you click any of those links down below, it would really help me out. It would help me bring more content to the channel. All right, guys. We'll catch you next time. Bye.
Okay, so best case scenario, everything worked out great. You can stop watching, you can move on, whatever. But there's a possibility when you plug it in your computer, it's going to say device isn't recognized and it's not going to work. Here's some tips that I found for troubleshooting this issue that you may want to try if you're having a problem. So go ahead and grab your multimeter and set to continuity. If you have a beeper on there that just beeps when you connect the leads, that's great. First thing you want to check for is continuity between these two wires. And this is typically where the issue is these two are bridged. Because the solder pads are so close together, it's very easy to end up with a solder bridge either here or here. So what we're going to want to do is just probe both sides. And we have no continuity. Touch the two like that and reverse them. Like that and like this. Okay, so this one works, so we're not going to have continuity. We're not going to have any problems. So if you didn't find any issues there, then you're going to want to try like this. You're going to want to make sure you do have continuity through this plane here. And same thing for the other side. And that should pretty much cover the majority of the issues. It is possible that you may have poorly soldered the other two wires, or you soldered them in the wrong place. So if this still isn't working, go back to the beginning of the video, watch it again, be very careful, pay attention to what you're doing. And if all that doesn't work, it may be that your old USB, the mini USB port, is shorted internally. If that's the case, you're going to have to sever the connections on that. There's a lot of different ways you can do it. You can either remove this entire breakout board, which is probably the best way to do it, because then you're just left with a bunch of clean pads to solder to. Or you can just remove the USB port itself off of the board that sticks out of this. However you choose to do it, that's on you. If you're going to remove just the USB port, which is probably the way I would go, just take a pair of diagonal cutters, clip the legs on it, desolder it, clean up the traces, make sure nothing's bridged, do your continuity checks, and that should do it. If that doesn't work, you might be out of luck. You may have damaged your backboard in some way, shape, or form, and the only easy fix is going to be just buying a new backboard. If you figure out the schematics and you figure out different places to probe to, you probably don't need this video, and you probably don't need me to help you out. You're probably at that advanced level that you would just do this on your own. But anyways, if you have any problems, questions, comments, concerns, let me know, and I'll be glad to help you out. Catch you next time, and happy flying.